Welcome back to Black Icons Uncovered. Today, we'll explore 19 Black power couples whose love burned brighter than fame and often ended in ashes. They possessed voices that moved the world, beauty that made cameras flash incessantly. But behind the gold records and packed stadiums, their hearts were battlefields. These weren't just romantic stories. They were explosions. Sneaky kisses in the recording studio. Silver rings rolling on the cold hotel floor. Love letters that never went to waste. Late-night balconies. For decades, people whispered about them, breathtakingly glamorous couples, so dangerous that even Hollywood seemed to be wary when they walked into a room. Stay until the end, because some of these stories will change the way you listen to their songs forever. Barry White and Glodian White, the sultry sovereigns who made Hollywood burn with envy. Barry White and Glodian James were something far rarer, a seamless fusion of velvet sensuality and royal grandeur that soul music had never seen before. Barry, with that gravel-deep, hypnotic bass, was once described as the man who could make a million women melt with a single line. In 1973, "I'm Gonna Love You Just a Little More, Baby" soared up the charts, and with it, Barry ascended to a level of fame so intoxicating he later admitted he could no longer tell where the music ended and desire began. Glodian James, the luminous voice of Love Unlimited, was already a quiet storm in her own right. Her languid gaze, waist-length black hair, and lips curved in a knowing tease had left more than a few powerful men breathless. Jet magazine crowned her the underground queen of soul, and whenever she stood beside Barry, the air itself seemed to tighten, thick, electric, almost too charged to breathe. Together, they didn't just enter a room. They transformed it. On May 5, 1973, inside a Beverly Hills mansion, Barry hosted a private gathering, fewer than 20 guests. No one sensed history hovering in the air. Then, at the stroke of midnight, Barry and Glodian stepped in from the balcony, hands intertwined, moving slowly toward a silent Steinway resting in the living room. Barry sat down, let a few warm chords drift into the crowd, then rose and kissed her. The room froze. Laughter flared for a heartbeat, then vanished. One guest would later swear they had never witnessed a kiss so tender, yet so unapologetically possessive. Right there, beneath crystal chandeliers and stunned eyes, Barry vowed to marry Glodian at dawn. And he meant it. Within weeks, they were wed, turning a blazing romance into a marriage that would define an era. They became soul music's most sensual power couple, wealthy, magnetic, commanding. To stand near them was to feel the shift in gravity. Ordinary. Marvin Gaye and Jane Kennedy. A silver ring glinting in the dark. A love born in a season of unnamed sorrow. In a Hollywood famous for glitter and wreckage, their romance was whispered about as something rare, fragile, almost sacred. It felt like a miracle that slipped through the cracks of chaos. A shattered man finding a final flicker of comfort in the steady, luminous gaze of a woman who seemed too radiant to belong to the real world. Anyone who ever saw them sitting in silence inside a Motown studio, no cameras, no applause, understood something wordless and true. Even the heaviest hearts deserve to be loved at least once. Even if it's only for a moment. By 1971, Marvin Gaye stood at the summit of greatness. What's Going On wasn't just an album, it was a prayer and a protest wrapped in velvet and fire. It echoed through a generation weary of war, injustice, and spiritual emptiness. His voice carried both tenderness and rebellion, turning him into the conscience of an era. But behind the gold records and standing ovations, his private life was collapsing. His marriage to Anna Gordy was unraveling thread by thread, late nights, shouting matches, jealousy that burned like acid. Cocaine crept in quietly, then took hold with white, merciless fingers. Smoke filled the rooms. Silence followed. He once admitted in a moment of raw confession, "I'm afraid I'll die alone in this room, with no one left who believes I deserve to be loved." Then Jane Kennedy walked into his life. Barely in her 20s, Jane was already rewriting history, the first Black Miss Ohio, a stunning television personality whose presence commanded every room she entered. She carried herself with regal grace, but her smile held warmth, not arrogance. Marvin couldn't look away. They met at a gala on Sunset Boulevard. Jane stood laughing among actors and executives, her joy effortless. Across the room, Marvin lingered in the shadows, eyes tired from endless studio hours, carrying a storm inside his chest. The moment their eyes met, something shifted. To him, she felt like rescue. Like oxygen. Their affair unfolded in secrecy for nearly 2 years. By day, Jane shone on television screens, confident, triumphant, untouchable. By night, she would slip into Motown Records and sit quietly beside Marvin while he worked. They shared an old wooden chair stained with coffee rings and scattered lyric sheets. Sometimes they didn't speak. Their hands intertwined, and that was enough. But love cannot heal what refuses to be healed. By August 1972, Marvin's addiction had tightened its grip. Paranoia shadowed him. He became convinced that if Jane left, he would lose his final reason to live. On the night of August 19th, in room 302 of the Chateau Marmont, the air felt heavy. The hum of the air conditioner. The faint scorch of a crushed cigarette. After 6 exhausting hours recording Let's Get It On, Marvin turned toward her with trembling hands. He placed a silver ring, engraved with the word goodbye, into her palm. Then he fell to his knees. The lamplight washed his face pale, hollow. His voice cracked, stripped of pride. "Please, save me from myself." Jane's hands shook. Tears darkened the collar of her cream silk dress. She bent down, pressing her lips softly to his forehead, a kiss that felt more like farewell than promise. She knew what he could not admit. Love alone cannot pull a man out of his own abyss. Without another word, she walked away. The silver ring slipped from her hand and rolled across the cold stone floor, spinning until it stilled. That night, Marvin collapsed into a red velvet chair and wept until nothing remained but silence. From that moment forward, the memory of her became both sanctuary and poison, bleeding into every lyric, every relapse, every note sung from a wounded place. Years later, when his life ended in the crack of a gunshot, some believe the tragedy began long before that fatal day. It began the night hope slipped from his grasp, and a silver ring rolled into the dark. Wilson Pickett and Aretha Franklin. When the Screaming King bowed to the Queen of Soul. Atlantic Records Studio. 2 forces of nature walked into the same room, and the temperature changed. Wilson Pickett was already known as the Wicked Pickett, a man whose voice didn't sing, it attacked. Urgent. Dangerous. Aretha Franklin wasn't just a singer. She was royalty. The Queen of Soul. Every note she released carried command. When Barry first introduced them during a joint session, witnesses said Wilson didn't blink the way other men did around Aretha. He studied her, not with fear, but fascination. She noticed. Aretha that year was untouchable. Thick dark hair piled high, eyes heavy with intelligence, lips curved in a knowing half-smile. Men admired her. Few dared approach her. Wilson dared. During a late-night rehearsal for Land of 1,000 Dances, tension built between takes. The band laughed. Cigarette smoke curled toward the ceiling. Then suddenly, Wilson walked across the room, shut the studio door, and without warning pulled Aretha close. Not violent. Not careless. Certain. He kissed her in front of stunned musicians still gripping their guitars. One engineer dropped a reel-to-reel tape, magnetic strips spilling across the floor like exposed secrets. No one spoke. After that night, glances became charged. Hands brushed too long. The studio air felt tighter whenever they stood side by side. On September 9, 1969, backstage at the Apollo, Aretha sat removing her heels, exhaustion softening her usual armor. Wilson approached quietly, then did something no one expected. He knelt, took her hand, pressed his lips to her skin. An orchestra full of grown men stood frozen. There are no photographs of them as lovers. No public confession. Only whispers. But those who were there insist, for a brief, blazing moment, the Screaming King bowed only to one woman. And she let him, Jackie Wilson and Dorothy Dandridge. The lover who slipped out the window. If you needed just one romance to prove that old Hollywood could still conjure love stories so dazzling, so reckless they felt unreal, this would be it. Jackie and Dorothy were living proof. They looked like two worlds that were never meant to collide. A wildfire soul singer and a silver screen goddess crowned in Oscar light and untouchable elegance. He was Mr. Excitement, the man whose blazing voice and electric hips left women across America breathless. But for all the screaming crowds and endless admirers, Jackie's heart wasn't loyal to the stage. It was hopelessly entwined with Dorothy Dandridge. By then, Dorothy was already an Oscar-nominated star, celebrated for her regal beauty and those dark, searching eyes that always seemed to carry a hint of sadness. People used to whisper that when she entered a room, married men forgot their vows and women suddenly felt invisible. In 1959, at the height of Jackie's fame and his string of restless affairs, he met Dorothy at a glittering Beverly Hills party. One night was all it took. Two opposites, drawn together by something neither dared to name. For nearly 2 years, they hid away in a small villa in the Malibu Hills, stealing moments the world could never see. On the night of June 14, 1960, they sat close in the dim living room, Jackie bare-chested, Dorothy wrapped in silk, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. An old record player hummed in the background. Then, without warning, the door flew open. Jackie's wife stood there, frozen, her face drained of color, burning with fury. Panic exploded in the room. Dorothy, terrified, ran for the window. Her dress caught on a chair, nearly pulling her to the floor. She yanked it free, climbed over the sill, and disappeared into the cold Malibu night. By sunrise, the story had raced through record labels and film studios alike. Everyone was whispering about Dorothy, the lover who escaped through the window. Jackie was branded a shameless womanizer. And yet, long after the scandal cooled, people swore Dorothy once confessed that if given the choice again, she would still love Jackie, the only man who ever made her proud, guarded heart lose control. Smokey Robinson and Diana Ross. The confession in the Detroit night. By the late 1960s, Motown was more than a record label, it was an empire. And at its center stood two untouchable figures. Smokey Robinson, smooth, disciplined, the gentleman poet of soul. His voice floated like silk over heartbreak. People trusted him, respected him. He was the calm in an industry built on chaos. Diana Ross, luminous, precise, and intimidating in her beauty. As the face of the Supremes, she didn't just perform, she commanded. Every glance was calculated. Every movement royal. They had known each other for years. Friends, collaborators. Until 1968. As Diana prepared to leave the Supremes and step into her solo destiny, long studio nights brought them closer. Conversations stretched past midnight. Laughter softened into silence. On March 15, 1969, they were alone in Studio B in Detroit, just them and a single engineer behind the glass. Diana stood in the vocal booth, finishing a tender take. Smokey watched, something restless moving beneath his composed exterior. When she stepped out, he didn't speak. He walked toward her, wrapped his arms around her from behind. The air tightened instantly. They stood there, breathing unevenly, suspended between loyalty and desire. Then the studio door opened. The engineer froze. Smokey stepped back, face pale. In a moment of panic, he pulled out his wallet, pressed $500 into the man's hand, and whispered a plea for silence. No shouting. No scandal that night. But something had already broken. Afterward, Diana withdrew. Smokey buried himself in touring and writing. Rumors circulated quietly through Motown's hallways, but nothing was ever confirmed. Years later, Smokey admitted there had been a moment, one that cost him peace more than reputation. Because sometimes the most dangerous affairs aren't loud. They're quiet. A single embrace in a dark studio. And the knowledge that you crossed a line you can never fully erase. David Ruffin and Tammy Terrell. The wild love that turned tragic. David Ruffin was chaos wrapped in charisma. As the magnetic lead of the Temptations, his voice didn't just sing, it commanded. Women screamed. Executives tolerated his temper because talent like his was rare. Tammy Terrell was the opposite. Soft smile. Gentle eyes. A voice so tender it felt like sunlight through stained glass. When she sang duets, especially with Marvin Gaye, audiences believed in love again. They began seeing each other in 1966. At first, it felt like balance, storm meeting still water. David adored her sweetness. He called her the only woman who could quiet the noise in his head. But adoration in David's world quickly turned into possession. The jealousy started subtly. Questions, accusations, late-night confrontations. On May 22, 1967, Tammy returned to her New York apartment after recording all day. She hadn't even taken off her coat when pounding fists shook her door. David stood outside, eyes bloodshot, breath heavy with whiskey. He pushed inside without waiting. He shouted that she needed to leave Motown. Leave everyone. Run away with him that very night. His voice rose, then broke. He grabbed her hands, then her dress, then dropped to his knees, clinging to her as if she were oxygen. Neighbors heard the chaos. An elderly woman upstairs called the police. When officers arrived, David was still on the floor, trembling between rage and desperation. Tammy stood frozen, tears streaking her face. After that night, something inside her shifted. Rumors spread that his love had become violent. That the intensity wasn't romance anymore, it was fear. Just a year later, Tammy collapsed on stage during a performance. She would never fully recover. By 1970, at just 24 years old, she was gone. Some say David never forgave himself. Others say he carried the guilt like a shadow until his own life unraveled. Their love had started like a duet, but it ended in silence. Eddie Kendricks and Diana Ross. The night that made Motown tremble. Motown was glittering, but underneath the polish, tension simmered. Eddie Kendricks, the falsetto heart of the Temptations, was known for his smooth charm and disciplined image. He wasn't reckless like David Ruffin. He was controlled, polished, until Diana Ross smiled at him. Diana was stepping into her solo era, sharper, colder, more untouchable than ever. Her beauty wasn't soft. It was commanding. When she walked through the Motown halls, conversations shifted. Men straightened. Women watched carefully. Their closeness began quietly. Late rehearsals. Lingering eye contact. Eddie offering to walk her to her car long after everyone else had left. By November 18, 1968, at a label party in New York's Waldorf Astoria, the tension was undeniable. After midnight, Diana invited Eddie upstairs. No spectacle. No witnesses. Inside her suite, she slipped off her heels and leaned back in an armchair, exhaustion briefly cracking her queenly armor. Eddie stepped closer, heart pounding louder than any stage monitor he'd ever stood in front of. They didn't rush. They sat beside the window overlooking the city lights, hands slowly intertwining. Diana admitted she was tired of always being the perfect one. Eddie confessed he was tired of being the safe one. For a moment, they weren't stars. Just two people craving softness. But secrecy never lasts in Motown. Early the next morning, as Eddie exited the hotel lobby, a photographer snapped a picture, him holding a small envelope Diana had handed him minutes before. Inside was a handwritten note in purple ink. By afternoon, Detroit was buzzing. Motown reportedly paid quietly to keep the image from exploding publicly. But the rumor had already done its damage. Diana became the woman no man could resist. Eddie became the fool who risked everything. They eventually drifted apart under pressure. Yet insiders insist there was once a night when Motown's golden empire trembled, not from scandal, but from a love too powerful to stay hidden. Sam Cooke and Eartha Kitt. The affair that nearly drowned in the dark. Early 1960. Sam Cooke was becoming unstoppable. You send me. Chain Gang. A voice so smooth it slipped past racial barriers and into millions of homes. He wasn't just a singer, he was revolution in a tailored suit. Eartha Kitt was something else entirely. Sultry. Intelligent. Dangerous in a way that made powerful men nervous. Her feline grace, her accent that curled around every syllable, her eyes that always seemed to know more than she revealed. They met at a private Atlantic Records gathering. Witnesses said Sam couldn't stop watching her. Eartha, amused, let him look, but she never chased. Their affair began quietly. Secret hotel suites. red-eye flights under false names, dinners in shadowed corners where a single camera flash could have destroyed everything Sam had built. He was cultivating a carefully controlled public image. Eartha was already considered provocative, unpredictable. Together, they were combustible. On February 8, 1961, Sam rented a luxury yacht in Miami. Champagne chilled in silver buckets. Soft jazz playing through deck speakers. The harbor lights reflecting like scattered diamonds across black water. After dinner, he dropped to one knee. A Tiffany diamond ring glinted in his trembling hand. For a split second, Eartha's face softened. Sam misstepped near the railing. He stumbled backward into the dark ocean. Shouts. Chaos. 10 long minutes before crew members hauled him back aboard, soaked, shaken, still clutching the ring box. Something changed that night. Eartha returned to New York shortly after. The calls slowed. The meetings stopped. No official announcement. No dramatic ending. Just silence. Sam married someone else the following year. But friends would later say he had never looked at another woman the way he looked at Eartha Kitt on that yacht, like a man willing to risk drowning for love. Sometimes fate doesn't break a romance with scandal. Sometimes it just lets it slip beneath the surface. Lou Rawls and Jane Kennedy. The romance that lit up Las Vegas. Las Vegas was glowing gold. Lou Rawls had become the definition of smooth sophistication. When he sang, "You'll never find another love like mine," the entire showroom at Caesar's Palace would fall silent, women gripping their champagne glasses as if the lyrics were meant only for them. Then there was Jane Kennedy. Former beauty queen. Television trailblazer. Poised, radiant, impossibly elegant. When she walked through a casino lobby in a sequined gown, the scent of her perfume lingered long after she passed. They met backstage after one of Lou's sold-out performances. At first, it was polite conversation. Compliments. Soft laughter. But within days, hotel staff noticed the pattern. Jane attending every show, Lou lingering after curtain call. On July 12, 1975, Lou rented the top-floor suite at Caesar's. Fresh white lilies filled the room. A grand piano stood near the window overlooking the strip. He handed Jane a 12-page letter. 100 reasons he adored her. He promised to protect her from gossip, from industry cruelty, from loneliness. Jane read it slowly, eyes shimmering under the suite's warm light. 4 months, they were Las Vegas royalty, entering banquets hand in hand, smiling calmly at whispers. But touring schedules stretched them thin. Rumors circled. The romance faded without explosion. Still, those who saw them together insist. For one glittering summer, they were the couple who kept Las Vegas awake, Donny Hathaway and Roberta Flack. The duet of destiny. When Donny Hathaway sang, it felt like confession. His voice carried ache, not performance, not polish, but vulnerability so raw it made audiences lean forward without realizing it. Yet behind the brilliance lived a fragile mind already wrestling shadows no one fully understood. Roberta Flack was different. Composed. Intelligent. Her beauty was quiet, refined. She didn't need drama to command a room. Her presence alone softened chaos. They met at Atlantic Studios. The first time their voices blended, something irreversible happened. Where Is the Love didn't just climb charts. It felt like two souls intertwining in real time. Late nights became routine. Recording sessions stretched past midnight. Between takes, Donny would sit silently at the piano, staring at the keys as if they were answers he couldn't reach. On February 28th, under the red glow of a studio light, he turned to Roberta, eyes glassy with exhaustion. "If I'm not loved, I'll die," he whispered. It wasn't manipulation. It was truth. Their connection deepened. On stage, they were untouchable. Backstage, Donny's dependence grew heavier. Phone calls at 3 a.m. Sudden mood shifts. Desperation wrapped in devotion. Roberta loved him, but she could not carry him. As his mental health deteriorated, she stepped back, heartbreaking in silence. Their duets continued, but something inside him was already unraveling. Then, in January 1979, inside a New York hotel, Donny fell from a window. 33 years old. The world called it tragedy. Roberta called it loss. Years later, she would still struggle to perform their songs without pausing to steady her breath. Some duets end when the music fades. Theirs ended in silence that still echoes. Otis Redding and Carla Thomas. The secret behind the sweet soul. Memphis. Stax Records was alive with raw sound and southern heat. Otis Redding was already crowned the king of soul. Rough voice, intense stare, a presence that could shake rafters. When he sang, it felt like he was tearing open his chest and handing you his heart. Carla Thomas was Stax royalty too, the queen of Memphis. Delicate features, bright intelligent eyes, a voice smooth as satin but strong beneath the surface. When they recorded in the same studio halls, something unspoken lingered. Engineers noticed how Otis' booming laughter softened when Carla entered. How Carla, usually composed, blushed slightly when he held her gaze a second too long. On April 3, 1967, during a late session, Otis suddenly stopped mid-rehearsal. He stepped away from the microphone, walked straight to the control board and declared, half joking, half deadly serious, that he wouldn't sing another note unless Carla admitted she felt something too. The room froze. Carla looked down, cheeks flushed, saying nothing. They resumed recording. But from that night forward, the air between them changed. Their harmonies felt warmer. Their glances lingered. No public affair. No confirmed romance. Just chemistry everyone could feel. Months later, Otis boarded a small plane. It never reached its destination. After his death, Carla rarely spoke about those studio nights. But those who were there insist there had been something real. Not loud. Not reckless. Just two voices, perfectly matched, almost crossing a line they never dared step over. Billy Preston and Darlene Love. The ring no one wore. Billy Preston was everywhere. The keyboard genius. The man the Beatles trusted. The only artist credited as the fifth Beatle. His smile was bright, his talent undeniable, and the industry lined up to work with him. But behind the fame, Billy carried a quiet loneliness few noticed. Darlene Love was no stranger to greatness either. The radiant voice behind Phil Spector's biggest hits. Her beauty effortless. Her laugh warm enough to light up the dullest studio hallway. They met during crowded sessions at A&M Records. Between layered harmonies and retakes, something gentle began to grow. No headlines. No spectacle. Just long conversations after the musicians left. Shared coffee at 2 a.m. piano keys echoing softly in near-empty rooms. On June 17, 1974, after a marathon recording night, the studio finally fell silent. Billy walked to the door. Locked it. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small silver ring. No speech prepared. No grand theatrics. He simply dropped to one knee on the cold concrete floor beneath the dim yellow lights. Darlene stood frozen, hands covering her mouth. Billy's voice trembled, not with fear of rejection, but with fear of being alone forever. For a moment, it felt like destiny was pausing. Then Darlene shook her head. Tears slid down her cheeks. She loved him, but not the way he needed. The ring was never worn. After that night, their friendship softened into distance. Billy never married. Darlene rarely mentioned the proposal again. Some say the saddest love stories aren't explosive. They're quiet. A locked studio. A silver ring. And a no that echoes longer than applause. Chuck Jackson and Dionne Warwick. The love no one could break. New York. Chuck Jackson's voice had already wrapped itself around the charts with Any Day Now. Smooth. Controlled. Emotional without ever losing composure. He carried himself like a gentleman. Measured, deliberate, never reckless. Dionne Warwick was something else entirely. Elegant. Regal. Eyes filled with quiet depth. When she sang a Burt Bacharach melody, the entire room leaned in. She didn't overpower, she pierced. They met through overlapping sessions and industry events, but their closeness grew in hotel corridors and late rehearsals, away from the press. On April 14th, inside the Warwick Hotel, something shifted. The hallway buzzed with journalists and label executives after a showcase performance. Suddenly, the elevator doors opened, and Chuck and Dionne stepped out together. Hand in hand. Not hiding. Not apologizing. just walking calmly through the stairs. Reporters froze. Musicians exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "They're not even trying to deny it." And that was the power of it. Their love wasn't chaotic like others. It wasn't fueled by jealousy or scandal. It was steady, intentional, almost defiant in its quiet confidence. They recorded together, dined together, appeared side by side without theatrics. But the industry is relentless. Touring schedules pulled them in opposite directions. Pressure mounted. Public speculation grew louder. Eventually, distance did what gossip could not. They drifted apart. Dion went on to become an immortal voice of R&B. Chuck continued performing with grace until the end of his life. He rarely answered questions about her. But insiders insist there was once a moment, in that hotel hallway, when two of soul's most composed voices chose each other openly. And for that night, no one could break them. Solomon Burke and Carla Thomas. When the king fell hard. Memphis. Solomon Burke was already called the King of Soul, towering presence, commanding voice, a man who filled every stage without moving an inch. He had a family, a reputation, and an authority no one questioned. Carla Thomas was Stax's golden princess, soft-faced, luminous, her gentle voice masking a quiet strength. Where Solomon was thunder, Carla was morning light. They met during joint sessions at Atlantic. At first, it was admiration, then fascination. On August 8th, in the middle of a recording, Solomon suddenly stopped singing. The band looked up, confused. He stepped toward the control board, eyes locked on Carla, and declared he wouldn't finish the session unless she admitted she felt what he felt. The studio fell silent. Carla didn't answer. But later that night, he appeared at her apartment with flowers far too large for discretion and fruit baskets like a nervous young man on his first date. Memphis noticed. Musicians whispered. Executives worried. A married king falling publicly for a rising princess was a dangerous headline waiting to explode. Their connection burned briefly. Intense, impossible to hide, but reality closed in. Solomon's marriage strained. Carla stepped back before the damage became permanent. They parted quietly. Yet those who saw them together say Solomon Burke only looked vulnerable once in his life. And it was when he looked at Carla Thomas, Curtis Mayfield and Minnie Riperton. The love song never recorded. Chicago. Curtis Mayfield was a visionary, soft-spoken, politically sharp, a songwriter who could turn pain into poetry. His music carried messages of resistance and hope, but in person he was quiet, almost shy. Minnie Riperton was radiant. Her soprano could climb notes few humans could reach. But beyond the voice was her warmth, brown eyes full of intelligence and vulnerability, a smile that disarmed even the most guarded producer. They met during a recording session at Chicago Recording Company. Curtis had written countless hits for others. But this time, something felt personal. On May 3rd, after hours in the studio, he placed a handwritten manuscript on the piano. The ballad. So, confessional. Lyrics that felt less like songwriting and more like revelation. He looked at Minnie, not as a producer, but as a man. The room was empty except for them. "Sing it," he said quietly. Minnie read the lyrics. Her expression softened. She understood immediately. If she recorded it, everyone would know. She gently closed the manuscript and shook her head. Not because she didn't feel something, but because some love is too fragile to survive exposure. The song was never recorded. Years later, insiders would whisper that the most beautiful love ballad Curtis Mayfield ever wrote was the one no one would ever hear. Barry White and the Mysterious Actress. The scandal that almost broke him. Late 1978. Barry White was untouchable. The deep voice. The silk suits. The image of a love god who ruled romance like an empire. But beneath the polished legend was a secret chapter few ever confirmed. She was a television actress, blonde, blue-eyed, dangerously beautiful. Her name never officially surfaced, but insiders knew she existed. They met quietly at a Bel Air mansion Barry often used as a retreat. Champagne. Low lighting. Curtains drawn. On December 4th, just past midnight, Barry lay wrapped in a silk robe, her laughter still hanging in the air, when the door suddenly burst open. A paparazzo. Flashbulbs exploded. Dozens of photos snapped before security dragged the intruder out. By morning, a major Los Angeles tabloid was ready to print everything. Barry's lawyers moved fast. Threats, settlements, quiet negotiations. The film was bought. The story buried. The public never saw the images. But Barry knew how close he had come to losing everything. The affair ended soon after. He returned to his empire of music, but those near him said he was more cautious, more guarded. Because sometimes the most dangerous romances aren't the ones that burn. They're the ones that almost get exposed. Ray Charles and Ruth Brown. 7 letters without reply. Ray Charles was already hailed as a genius, blind, brilliant, unstoppable. His piano spoke where words failed. Women adored him. Fame surrounded him. Ruth Brown was no less powerful. The queen of R&B, proud voice. Striking beauty. A woman who never chased, she chose. After a chance reunion backstage in New York, Ray became captivated. Not casually interested, obsessed. Over 3 weeks, he sent her 7 handwritten letters. Each one 3 pages long. In them, he called her, "My Queen of Light." He confessed that during sleepless tour nights, it was her face he imagined beside him. On March 22nd, he sent the final envelope. Inside, a plane ticket to meet him privately at his studio. Ruth never responded. No rejection. No explanation. Just silence. Friends later said she folded the letters carefully and tucked them into the bottom of her suitcase, unread again, but never discarded. Ray moved on publicly. Other romances filled headlines. But those close to him believed something lingered, a quiet bruise left by the only woman who didn't surrender to his passion. Sometimes the most powerful love stories aren't the ones that begin. They're the ones that never do. Jackie Wilson and Mary Wells. The Kiss That Cost $1,000. September 13, 1962. Columbia Studios. Mary Wells was only 19, fresh-faced, bright-eyed, Motown's rising sweetheart. Her voice carried innocence, her smile disarmed every room she entered. Jackie Wilson was already infamous. Electrifying on stage. Undisciplined off it. That evening, Mary stopped by the studio to hear new mixes. Jackie had been drinking. The scent of bourbon followed him down the hallway. Inside the mixing room, without warning, he threw his arm around her shoulders and pressed a heavy, alcohol-soaked kiss against her lips. Mary froze. A chair scraped. Glass shattered somewhere down the corridor. The next morning, a manager handed her an envelope. $1,000. And a confidentiality agreement. No press. No scandal. No apology. They continued appearing at events together as if nothing had happened. Mary never publicly spoke about that night. And Jackie carried on like the moment had dissolved into smoke. But sometimes silence is bought. And sometimes a single kiss costs more than money. Bobby Womack and Tina Turner. The balcony that shook Hollywood. Los Angeles. Bobby Womack had just stepped into solo stardom, young, talented, hungry. His guitar cried with emotion. His voice carried grit and longing. Tina Turner was already a force of nature. Flame-red hair. Eyes that burned through stage lights. A woman who didn't just perform, she detonated. Rumors of their closeness followed them through tour buses and hotel corridors. Whispers. Late-night laughter. Glances held a second too long. Then came September 4th. The Sunset Marquis Hotel. Near midnight, Bobby, fueled by whiskey and reckless courage, climbed onto Tina's balcony holding red roses and a bottle of champagne. Below, traffic hummed. Above, the sky was black and breathless. He knocked on the glass. When Tina opened the door, he dropped to his knees. Not for headlines. Not for spectacle. For one last night, he pleaded. So I don't regret it forever. In that exact moment, a photographer across the courtyard captured the image. Bobby kneeling, roses in hand, Tina framed in the doorway like fire behind glass. By morning, the photo was everywhere. Hollywood exploded. Tina quietly packed her bags and left the hotel without a word. Bobby issued a public apology that could never fully contain the scandal. Their connection ended as abruptly as it ignited. But for one reckless midnight, beneath a balcony light and a sky that held its breath, two legends collided, proving that even the biggest stars can be undone by the simplest human need: to be loved back. These couples loved like every night might be the last, reckless, tender, desperate, unforgettable. Some left behind silver rings. Some left unanswered letters. Some left only rumors and hotel room memories that still echo through music history. Hollywood remembers the hits, but we remember the hearts. Which love story moved you the most? Tell us in the comments and subscribe, because the secrets behind the spotlight are far from over.